Welcome to today's talk, Eva Zeisel, Designer Extraordinary, in our series, Flight or Fight, Stories of Artists Under Repression. I'm Rachel Stern, Director and CEO of the Fritz Ascher Society for Persecuted, Ostracized, and Banned Art based in New York. We research, discuss, publish, and exhibit artists whose life and work were affected by the German Nazi regime between 1933 and 1945. This is our first event since the horrific massacre in Israel. As we navigate through the aftermath, our hearts go out to the victims and their families. In our work, we remain committed to teaching and discussing fact-based history. Thank you, Cordula Hahn, for making me aware of Zeisel and her work. I very much appreciate and enjoy the growing input from our community. I'm now honored to introduce Eva Zeisel's daughter, Jean Richards, a graduate of Yale Drama School. She's an actor who appeared in minor and major theater productions and specialized in voiceovers. Jean has also written best-selling children's books. Still on the market is A Fruit is a Suitcase for Seeds at Lerner Publishing. Jean Richards will first speak about her mother's life, then show and comment her work. We'll conclude today's event with Jean reading from her mother's memoir of 16 months in a Soviet prison between 1937 and 38, during the Stalinist purges. After the talk, there will be time for Q&A, so please post your questions in the chat. Welcome, Jean.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and thank everybody for joining. So, since the theme of this Fritz Ascher series is the persecution of artists, I thought it would be interesting to tell a little about the relationship of Judaism to our family. So Eva grew up in a bourgeois, Hungarian, very intellectual, assimilated family. That in itself is not unusual. I believe Fritz Ascher grew up in a similar family. But what interested me was the origin of this idea of cultural assimilation between the Jews and others. And it began in our family with Eva's great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather. His name was Rabbi Asir Vol, and he was a professor in the teachers' seminary in Vilnius, which was part of the Russian Empire at the time. And he had very, very strong ideas about the Jews. He felt they should not cut themselves off and separate themselves off from the rest of society. And he wanted to build a bridge between the Jews and the Russians. So, among other things, he translated the Hebrew prayer book into the Russian language to show the Russians what was going on. And he also felt very strongly and helped arrange that the children, the Jewish children, not only learn religion, but learn a secular subject and have a classical education and learn the Russian language. And for all these efforts, he got a medal, a very important order from the Tsar's government. But that wasn't the only bridge he wanted to build. He also wanted to build a bridge between the Jews and the Christians. And to this end, he wrote a very long scholarly article, I have it somewhere in translation, showing how, in his opinion, the Talmud could illuminate certain things in the New Testament, which were perhaps not quite so clear or contradictory. And the Talmud could help. And that was the bridge to the Christians. And for that, he got another order. This one was from the Catholic Church. So as a friend of mine said the other day, one for each shoulder. Anyway, Eva's mother, Laura, and her mother, Cecile, were both ardent feminists. Laura actually gave lectures as early as 1900 on the women's rights and the fact that they should get equal pay for equal work and such things. So by the time it got down to Eva, she didn't have to be a feminist. And in fact, she wasn't a feminist. She just figured she could do whatever she wanted to do. And when Eva was 4 or 5 and her older brother a year older, her mother, Laura, founded an experimental kindergarten, kind of avant-garde, based on the ideas of Freud and Darwin and Dalcroze movement and such things. And one of the children in this kindergarten was little Arthur Koestler, who later, of course, became a famous writer. And at the end of the school year, the teacher asked the students what they were going to do during the summertime. And Eva raised her hand and she said, I'm going to make pictures. And little Arthur raised his hand and said, I'm going to make stories. So indeed, Eva did make pictures for much of her youth and early teenage and late teenage years. She sketched and made portraits and painted. And it was assumed that she was going to be a painter. And after high school, she attended the Academy of Fine Arts in Budapest. And when she left there, she had a discussion with her mother, and they decided together that she should learn a craft which would help support herself as a painter. I guess it's the equivalent of being a waiter now if you're an artist. But anyway, she apprenticed herself to the last master potter in the Hungarian guild system. And I love his name. His name was Mr. Karapancik. And Mr. Karapancik was the master potter in the medieval guild. And I'll read you the name of the guild because it's difficult to remember. It was the Guild of Chimney Sweeps, Oven Makers, Roof Tilers, Well Diggers, and Potters. And there she learned everything about clay from the ground up, how to choose it, how to mush it with your feet, of course, making things on the wheel and firing them. And then she would accompany Mrs. Karapancik to the marketplace to sell the wares. And after 6 months, it was time to have her examination to become a journeyman, which was the next step up from apprentice. And the judges came, and Mr. Karapancik suggested that she bring a liter of wine from home. They had a small vineyard and for the judges. And I don't know how much influence the wine had with the judges, but she passed the exam and she got a document that now she was a journeyman. And then she went home. They had a lovely property on the hills of Buda, and Eva founded her own pottery where she made everything by hand and fired it there in an underground wood-fired kiln. And one day, a gentleman came by to see her ware, and he was the manager of a factory in Budapest, a porcelain factory that made toilets and sinks. And he said to her, these are her own words, you should not be making things by hand. The Industrial Revolution has broken out. Why don't you come to our factory and set up an art department and make samples, and we'll produce your wares, which she did. And when I show you the photographs, you'll see some of the slightly kitschy things she made for that factory. But very soon it ended. And the reason it ended is that the people in the workers in the factory all came to the art department to see what was going on. And the bankers who owned the factory decreed that had to be closed down, the art department, and the workers should go back to making sinks and toilets, which they did. And then Eva put an ad in the paper, and it said, educated journeyman looking for a job. And she accepted an offer from a shop in Hamburg. And it was right next to the red light district, which was kind of a shock for a young lady of proper family, but not too much of a shock, because when she arrived, there were 4 pottery wheels in the shop. 3 of them were being worked on by men, and hers had a gift for her, which she described so delicately. She described it as, on her wheel was a perfectly formed clay male organ. So this was meant to shock her, but she just swept it aside and started her work. And eventually she got along well with the various workers in the factory. And at a certain point, the owner of this shop was going to fire her because he saw that she couldn't make things exactly the same as was required. But then he kept her on because he noticed that she could make things very different. And she designed lots of things, very imaginative, for this shop. And I believe one of them was even shown in the local Hamburg Museum. And she asked the shop owner if he could put her name on the things she had designed, and he really didn't want to do that. So fairly soon she left. And then after a vacation bicycling in the Scandinavian countries with her friends, she accepted an offer for a factory in the Black Forest, and it was the Schramberger Majolika Fabrik, and it was in the town of Schramberg in the Black Forest, a small town. I believe their previous designer had died, and they were looking for a new one. And on the way to this factory on the train, she was with a friend, and the friend showed her how to use a protractor and design on paper and a compass and ruler. And when she arrived and they asked her, how would you like to make the samples, by hand or design on paper? She said, well, design, of course. And this was actually her first job as an industrial designer, because up till then, everything had been made by hand. She stayed in this factory for almost 2 years, and she, at the age of 24, kept 350 workers busy making and decorating her designs. And that's really extraordinary. And I believe at the end of that time, she again asked if she could put her name underneath the pieces, and this was declined. And I find it interesting that early in her career, she knew how important that was, to have her name as a brand. And actually it would have been very helpful had they permitted her name to be on those designs, because a lot of the Schramberg pieces are sold in auctions now, and many of them are misattributed to her. So then she went on to the next stage of her life, which she said was by far the most elegant time she had ever spent. And her mother had rented an atelier for her and her brother, who was a patent attorney, in Berlin, in Weimar Berlin. And she had rented it from the painter Emil Nolde. I don't know why he was renting his studio, but he was. And this very elegant apartment atelier was right next to the Romanisches Cafe in the middle of town. And that was a cafe where the left-wing artists and journalists and scientists came to discuss how to save the world. And this was Weimar Berlin, which was very lively at the time. It was the time of the three-penny opera and a lot of decadent art and artists' balls with orgies and people making love on the floor. Anyway, kind of a wild time. And Eva noticed that, by the way, she didn't participate in the orgies. She was kind of a prude, actually. But she noticed that the things that came from Russia were very different from the George Gross drawings and Käthe Kollwitz. they were very pure and very lovely. The children's books were very beautiful, and the Cossack music and the theater, and all coming from this sort of new society. And she was very curious, as she always was, and she decided to go and see what was, as she put it, behind the mountain. And she went to Russia. And she was planning on an extended vacation there, a stay, and planning to come back. But she ended up staying there for, I don't know, a good 4 or 5 years. She was immediately hired by the Ukrainian Glass and Porcelain Trust. She went immediately to Kharkov. Kharkov is where she went. And of course, at that time, Ukraine and Russia were part of the Soviet Union. And she had many, many adventures in Russia. The trust, for example, assigned her to go and inspect some factories on the Polish border. And she would go in the winter, in the snow, at night, in horse-drawn sleigh across Ukraine with the wolves howling left and right, and many, many adventures. But her first assignment was to go to St. Petersburg to design and make an art department and design dishes. And that was the Lomonosov porcelain factory, which was really the imperial porcelain factory and had been there since Catherine the Great. And she did indeed design there. I'll show you some pictures of what she designed. What was quite interesting is that the suprematists, Malevich and Suetin, had been associated with that factory. And Suetin, I just learned, was the artistic director of the factory when she was there. So then she left there, and her next job was in the Duleva factory, one of the largest porcelain factories in the world, where she set up an art department with a very gifted painter who decorated her wares, Piotr Leonov. And they designed many, many things, or she designed many, many things, only some of which we've seen. For example, there's some reference to a children's tea set she designed there, which we have never seen. And at that time, she already became artistic director of the Russian China and Glass Trust. I don't know if she was an artistic director or the artistic director, but anyway, that was her position. And then she was assigned to design perfume bottles for Mrs. Molotov, because Mrs. Molotov was going to bring cosmetics in to this new society. But she never got a chance to design the perfume bottles, because one morning at 4:30, she opened the door and there was a lot of strangers, and they said, pack some things. They looked through her papers and her photographs, said, pack your things and come with us. And she got arrested. She assumed it was a mistake because she was not political at all, and she never criticized the government. She figured it was a mistake and she'd be back in a few days, but she wasn't. She was in this prison for 16 months. And when she got there and she asked the people, what am I arrested for? They said, a successful attempt on the life of Stalin. And she said, but he's alive. How successful could it have been? And they said, don't make bad jokes. Indeed, she did not come back in a few days and was there for 16 months and told this. We have this book of her Soviet prison memoirs. I'll read you some of it at the end of our little talk today. And every day that she was there, she thought she would be shot. But she wasn't. She was eventually expelled. And we found out later why she was arrested. There was a man named Mr. Bishovsky, who was a chemist in the factory where she had worked at Lomonosov, who was arrested and told, we'll shoot you unless you give us names. And he gave names, his uncle, his cousins, whatever. And they said, no, we need names of foreigners. So he gave Eva's name, and he said that her model maker from Germany that worked with her, she had chosen him because he was such a good shot. So that's how she got arrested. And many of her prison experiences became the basis of her kindergarten friend Arthur Koestler's book, Darkness at Noon, because when she got out, she told him all about her experiences. And you can find out in the book, in an essay by a couple of essays by Karen Kettering and by an FBI guy, how we found out that Stalin was directly involved in her imprisonment and probably made the decision to expel her rather than have her shot. Anyway, she got expelled. She went back to Vienna, where her family was and where my father was, her fiancé, Hans Zeisel, who was a young lawyer and sociologist. And there she recovered over several months. And at a certain point, Hitler marched in. And she said, that is it. No more trauma for me. And the day he marched in, she got on the train and left, made her way to England, where my father joined her. Eventually, they found a ship coming to America, and with $64 to their name, they arrived in America. And Eva said that when she saw the Statue of Liberty, the tears came to her eyes. Anyway, her brother had come to America a year before, so they had a place where they could elect, which they did. Their first thing they had to do was get jobs and then get the rest of the family or other family members and friends out of Europe with affidavits and tickets and whatever. And Hans did get a job right away with Paul Lazarsfeld, whom he had worked with in sociology project in Austria. And Eva did get a job, but how she got it was kind of fun. She immediately went to the public library and found a magazine called Crockery and Glass and made an appointment with the editor, went and said, here I am. I'm a very good designer. Do you have any ideas for me? And indeed, she did get a few small jobs through that. And one of the jobs was making plaster models in the shop at Pratt Institute, the famous art college in Brooklyn. And there she caught the eye of Mr. Costello, who had just set up an industrial design department at Pratt, and he invited her to teach there. And indeed, she taught there for the next 15 years and had a wonderful time doing it. And she taught a course that she herself invented called Ceramics for Industry, as opposed to handicraft. And her students were mostly guys, a little bit older because it was the after the war and they had a GI Bill. And she wanted them to see how their concepts and their drawings and their samples were seen through to the very end product. So she found a little factory in New Jersey, which agreed to make their designs into final products. She also designed some things for that factory. And for some reason, there was an exhibit of her student work, probably including her pieces, at Rockefeller Center. And one of the people who saw this exhibit was named Elliot Noyes. He was in charge of industrial design at the Museum of Modern Art. And they happened to be looking for a designer to make the first porcelain, beautiful, elegant set made in America after the war. And Mr. Noyes offered Eva this project. So she designed what was to be a very elegant, expensive heirloom set made in Castleton, China, and made for the Museum of Modern Art, which had to approve each piece. They never asked for changes, but they didn't include all the pieces she designed. And you will see photographs of that set, which is known as the museum shape. And that was shown at the Museum of Modern Art for the first one-woman show that they ever showed. And that show gave Eva lots of publicity. It was in the New York Times and many newspapers. And according to her, that's what put her on the map as an American designer. And after that, she got many commissions. And we can now look at some of the photographs, if that's okay with you. So I will tell, yeah. All right, this is the first photograph. It shows a sketch that Eva did of herself, a self-portrait, when she was 14 years old. And the next picture shows a painting she did of her younger brother a bit later. It's a really good painting. And the next picture shows Eva obviously older, but I put it in because it shows her self-portrait that she did when she was in her 20s. And here is a picture of Eva after she was an apprentice and got her journeyman's degree, and she went home and made her own pottery. And these are Eva with all her handmade pieces that she made in her own pottery before she went to the Kispester granite factory. And the next picture shows something that she designed. I told you it was a bit kitschy for this granite Kispester factory. This little guy, I don't know if he was an ashtray or a planter, but they made him, and this piece was actually imported to America. I've never seen it in America. If anybody has, please let me know. Then we go on. This was one of the first pieces that she designed in the Schramberg factory, Schramberger Majolika Fabrik. And as you can see, she used geometry, but she used it in a very playful way. This might have been already a sort of example of what she designed with the compass and the protractor. I think in the beginning she was a little surprised at the three-dimensional results of her drawings. But let's go on. The next piece, this photograph shows another set she designed in Schramberg. I believe it was a liqueur set. And the next set, this is very interesting. This is a piece she also designed at Schramberg. It's a desk set. It holds pens and ink. And it was inspired by modern architecture, which she saw first in the Paris exhibition in 1925. And she was very impressed by it. And this piece is in the permanent exhibit, collection of the Metropolitan Museum. And they show it every once in a while. Let us continue. Now, after Schramberg, Eva went to Berlin, Weimar Berlin, and this is how she looked there. I believe she designed this costume for herself with the big collar, and a friend of hers made it. It wasn't a costume, I believe it was a house coat, but this is what she looked like then. And the next picture. No, we're going backwards. We need to go forwards. No, we're still going backwards. Okay, now we go from Weimar Berlin to Russia. And this was the teapot of a set of various pieces that was made by the Lomonosov factory. And what's interesting about this is the decorations. This decoration, by the way, Eva did not make the decorations, just the forms. So this is a seagull. And I don't have a photograph of it, but when the subway opened in Moscow, they put a decoration of the subway on this teapot. And the third decoration, which I found interesting, was by Mr. Suetin. And he told Eva that he walked around all day thinking where was exactly the right place to put the red spot on this teapot. I don't have a picture of that either. So now we continue to a design she made at the large Duleva factory outside Moscow. And shortly thereafter, we go to the next slide. We show Eva's mugshot when she was arrested, before she had a chance to design the perfume bottles for Mrs. Molotov. And here is her mugshot. And then let's go on. Now, we have a big jump. We jump from being expelled from prison to going back to Vienna, to going to England, to coming to America, to teaching at Pratt Institute. They got to America in 38, and by 39, Eva was teaching at Pratt. And she was pregnant when she was teaching with me, and out of sort of ego, I include this picture of myself in 1940. Needless to say, I'm the newborn. I hope they gave her some time off from Pratt. So on we go. So in the early 40s, this was her design for the Museum of Modern Art. It was the museum shape. It was shown only later in 46. You see there the iconic coffee pot of the museum shape. And then we go on. And this is the pitcher for the same shape, and the creamer. You notice that the creamer has no handle. And Eva said something interesting about these shapes. Usually she used the S curve in her designs, which she loved and found very communicative. But in this case, her assignment was to make something very elegant and heirloom. So she pointed out that the curve from the bottom up started as a straight line, then a curve and another straight line. And she felt that this gave the feeling, communicated the feeling of elegance and expensiveness and an heirloom. And you can see that design in these shapes. Let's go on. The next slide shows the exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art, part of the exhibit, the first one-woman show at the Museum of Modern Art of this set, which put her on the map and got her a lot of commissions. So the next slide shows her first commission. It came from a factory on the Mississippi River in Red Wing, Minnesota, and they asked her to design something Greenwich Village-y. They said that their material wasn't very good, so they depended on trendy designs. And she thought it was a little odd that they asked for something Greenwich Village-y from so far away, but indeed she did fulfill the requirement. These show the various bowls and serving pieces. It came in many colors. It was mix and match. And of course, Eva went to visit the factory, which she always did. And I believe she went catfishing with the owner of the factory in the Mississippi River. So let's see some more pieces from this set. It's called the Town and Country set. Here you see a covered marmite, which I believe was meant for an individual soup bowl and to keep the cover on it to keep it warm. And you see two pitchers, again, not with regular handles, but very comfortable handles to hold. Everything Eva designed was meant not only to be looked at, but to be comfortable to touch. And then we go on to the iconic salt and pepper shakers from the same set. And these were based on mother and child. And the next slide shows the child, which is my brother, John, at an early age. And he was part of the inspiration for the salt and pepper set. And this shows that Eva was actually influenced by having children. And this set was never produced. These were samples made in Ohio, and they were a baby care set. The larger birdie had a cork underneath, and it was meant for either powder or oil. It had a little hole, of course, in the beak. And the covered the covered bowl was for cotton balls. It was a baby care set. Never came out. And the next, no, we went backwards again. Yeah, this set was called the Riverside China set. You see the sugar bowl in the back and the creamer in the front, again with no handle. She did make handles, but a great variety of them. And this was made in Riverside, California. We can see the next picture, which showed the cups from that set. And they had a variety of very exquisite glazes. Unfortunately, the factory closed down fairly soon, so there was a very small production, which makes them very rare today. So let us continue. Now we come to the chair. This chair, Eva was very proud of. She designed it early in the 50s, and it was made of tubular metal and cross pieces and held together by fabric. And she was very proud of this chair because she got a mechanical patent for it. It was actually a spring, very comfortable chair that kind of moved as you moved in it. And this chair was going to be our future. And I have to say, it was the only time that I know of that she was totally discriminated against as a woman. Because the die for this chair, which was a kind of mold, was sent out to a factory in Oskaloosa, Iowa, and it was going to be produced there, mass produced, and of course sold. And when the foreman of the factory found out that this die was made by a woman, he took an axe and he hacked it up. And he said, no woman can make a die like this and design a sample like this. And that was the end of the chair. And there are only 3 examples left, one in the Museum of Modern Art, one in the Boston Museum, and one in the museum in Montreal. So that was the end of the chair. Let's go on. This I put in just to show that my brother John and I always felt very welcome. Eva was doing some kind of project and we were helping or involved. And we never felt left out of her designing and her work in the studio. In fact, she gave us big parties for the whole class in her studio with art themes. And I realized she really loved big parties. So this just shows us as part of her work design. Let's go on to the next. Now this she designed in 1952. It was called Hallcraft, Tomorrow's Classic, and it was the best-selling set she ever designed. It was not made of porcelain, it was made of earthenware, and it was not a very expensive set, and it was extremely popular. And it came out in many, many designs in addition to being sold just plain white. And I think one year it was the best-selling set in America. The first few patterns that it came out with were designed under Eva's supervision by her design assistants. They were former Pratt students that she hired as assistants. And the rest of the patterns, maybe 30 patterns, decals, she had nothing to do with. Let's show the next set, which shows another piece. This is the gravy boat from this same piece, Hallcraft, Tomorrow's Classic, made by Hall China in East Liverpool, Ohio. It's really beautiful, isn't it? So let's go on. No, we go forward. Okay, this set was made in 1954, and it was made of stoneware by the Western Stoneware Company in Monmouth, Illinois. And I have it here because you can see the pattern on it, which actually was made by rubber stamps, which began as potato stamps. And when she got to this factory, they only made very thick stoneware, and she showed them how to make very thin, fine stoneware. And let's go on. This stoneware set, here are some of the serving pieces, and as you can see, they are birdies. There was a quote from Eva once which said, "When you put your hands in clay, it's hard not to make a bird." And of course, birds were part of the Hungarian folk themes, and they are a leitmotif in Eva's designs. So here are the bird serving pieces. And let's go on. Here is Eva in the factory, as usual, in Monmouth, Illinois, talking to the model maker, and you can see the bird casserole in the background. On we go. Now, this set was also made by Hull China. It was made later, I think in 56. It was called the Hull Craft Century. It didn't sell as well as the original. It was a little difficult to make, but was a kind of teardrop pattern and very nice. And then the next photograph shows you the bowls from that set up one on top of the other. And if it reminds you of the Edgerton photograph of the raindrop dropping onto water and splattering, that's not a coincidence. That was Eva's inspiration for this set. So on we go. I put this in just to show you that Eva had not lost her knack, although she didn't paint or draw, but she hadn't lost her knack for making portraits. This was done in the 1960s, and it is a portrait of her old friend, the famous physicist, Leo Szilard. And if you knew him, you would see that this was him. It just showed his soul, his humor. It got his essence. I think it was drawn to accompany an article about him, I think in the Atlantic magazine. So on we go. This set was made, I can look up the date. I don't have the date. It was made in Hickory, North Carolina, and it was called the Hyalin set. It came out in only 3 glazes. It had oversized serving pieces, and the next photograph shows some other pieces from the same set, including that very nice coffee pot, which was one of her favorite designs. And what comes next? Yes, in the year 2000, Eva was invited back to Hungary. She got a National Endowment of the Arts allowance to go to Hungary. It wasn't to design, it was, I believe, to look around. But anyway, she went to Hungary in the year 2000, and as usual, could not be kept back from designing. So she went to the Zsolnay factory, very famous old factory, famous for its eosin glazes, hooked up with the glaze maker and started designing some pieces. And here she is with her fig vase, the larger and smaller version of the fig vase. And she designed, we can go to the next slide, other pieces, including this, which I don't know if it's a vase or a bell, but it again shows off the beautiful golden glaze. And at the time in the 80s when she designed them, not many were sold, But later on, they were ordered again by the Orange Chicken Gallery and sold there. But before she came back to America, she went back to that. No, we're going back. We have to go forward. She went back to the Kishpaster granite factory and quickly designed another set. And this was the set that she designed in the 80s. She wasn't, we can go back to it. Whoops. No, let's go back one to the Kishpaster. Here we are. So this wasn't really produced at the time she designed it, or not sold widely, but years later was produced in white, not in a dark glaze, by Design Within Reach. And that store sold it for 10 years. And just this year, they stopped selling it, which was very sad. Now we can go on. In the 1990s, she had closed her studio and moved to Chicago, where my father was headquartered at the university, at the law school, and again, couldn't be helped back from designing. A carpenter came to their apartment to fix something, and she grabbed the carpenter and said, "How would you like to design wooden things with me?" And indeed. So, together with this carpenter, she designed furniture. Here is the trestle table made of 3 pieces plus the top. And if you look carefully, there's a bird, mama, and baby bird in it. And the next thing, in addition, she designed an oval coffee table, which was asymmetrical. Again, on one side is a birdie. And this was sold at Design Within Reach. I think the other one was also sold, I'm not sure, but this certainly was sold. Let us continue. Now, in the year 2000, she was invited back to the Lomonosov porcelain factory. And she was invited to be a panelist, ostensibly to be a panelist to judge the designs. But, so she said, yes, I'd love to go, but I have 2 conditions. One is I get a letter from the government saying I was false, I'm innocent, I was falsely accused, and I'm allowed back in the prison because after all I was back into Russia, because after all I was expelled from Russia. So she got that letter, and she said the other condition was I'm much too old to travel by myself. I have to take my daughter, my son-in-law, and my granddaughter. So the 4 of us went to St. Petersburg and had a very interesting time there for 10 days. And here she is shaking hands, keeping this fact, with an elderly gentleman who was a young boy when she left in the 20s. And we were told that he was the only person to survive in the factory, to survive the siege of Leningrad, and everyone else who was in the factory had died. So on we go. When we visited the factory, as usual, although she wasn't invited there to design, she got hold of Georgy Bogdovich, who was their model maker. She's found that he was the best model maker she had ever worked with, and they immediately sat down and she started designing a set. Now, of course, in 10 days, they couldn't finish designing the set. So a year or so later, the factory sent Georgie over to Eva's studio in Rockland County, where I am now. And they finished designing the set. And in the next picture, you see the finished set. It was made in St. Petersburg, and I believe is still being made in the same factory. And I think it's the most beautiful set Eva ever designed. The material is so beautiful that when you hold it up to the light, you can see through it. And it looks like frozen milk, absolutely beautiful. So that was it's called a talisman set. Now we go on. she came back. She designed glass and many other things. Here is what she called the U vase, designed for M Glass, which was a Portuguese factory. And another glass design, the next slide, she designed 3 Christmas ornaments for the Museum of Modern Art gift shop, made in Murano, very beautiful, handmade. And here we were in the subway in New York City, and suddenly we saw this ad for it. So here's a photograph of the ad for her 3 Christmas ornaments in the New York City subway. And we go on to the final 3 slides. These 3 photographs were taken by her granddaughter, Talisman, a very talented photographer. So here is Eva communing with one of her birdie designs, which is a vase. You might notice where the flowers come out of, which we can chalk up to her sense of humor. And the next picture shows Eva with all her teapots that she ever designed, which she called her children. And the last picture shows Eva, the queen, at the very end of her life. So that's all the pictures. And now, if we have time, I would like to read, at Rachel's suggestion, a little bit about her, a little bit from her book, this book, the Soviet Prison Memoirs. Surprisingly, it's not a gruesome book. So this was recorded and written much, much later, when she was much older. And a little bit of the book was written down, but most of it was recorded verbally and then transcribed. So the first paragraph of the book she did write, and it says, "Memories of long ago are not true. They have been gilded by time. The happenings I write down, the way I remember them now, with love for my youth, sentimentally, memories of times long past, of myself slim, young, and energetic, strong, resistant, sad, and alert. I speak of myself as much as of the things that happened to me. None of it is true, but I shall be precise in recording my memories." So this next part comes from the middle of the book. She lived in cell number 4, and she had many neighbors coming and going in cell number 5, and she found ways to communicate with them through the wall. One way was to jiggle the faucet and talk through the faucet. Another way was to knock on the wall. She had seen in an old Russian movie a grid with the letters, which the old Bolsheviks had used to communicate with their neighboring cells by knocking on the wall, knocking on the letters, and forming words. And when she went to the shower in prison, where she was allowed once a week a shower, she saw the same grid scratched into the wall. So she did communicate with her various neighbors, which of course are all written about in the book. So my neighbors in Leningrad prison were the dentist from Archangel, who went crazy, Natasha and Galina, and the party functionary. During the time of Galina, I had a roommate for 4 months. And this roommate was my scourge. She was my scourge because of her complete idiocy. Actually, she was a nurse, and she had gone to a German school. And one day she came back from her investigation and said that the investigator had told her something she could never repeat. It was so horrible. And it was just terrible what they did to people here. And I told her to try to repeat it. And she whispered, "Donnerwetter," which means thunder weather, which is like darn it in English. She was so pompous and so stupid that I could not resist educating her a bit upside down, like telling her that Hamlet was a musical and Africa was a mountain. I told her all sorts of things. I don't remember exactly what, but she just irritated me so much with her pompous stupidity. She was also very religious, and when I asked her what language Jesus spoke, she said, well, of course, Old Church Russian. Anyway, I told her many things, so she left well educated. Then there was a prostitute in my cell. She was there only 6 or 7 days. And she wanted to use the time very well. So she asked me how foreigners make love. She wanted to know all about it because she knew there was much to be learned. After all, she was an industrious professional and wanted to know everything. And I'm not really going to tell you all the things she told me, but she did give me some very good advice. But then she started to say, well, Stalin was really terrible. Oughtn't he be killed? And something like that. And I said to her, I will call the guard unless you shut up. And she was just a very stupid agent provocateur. Because I think later I noticed her washing the floor outside the cell, which meant that she was a criminal prisoner, not a political prisoner. She was definitely put in with me as an agent provocateur. So I had the prostitute for 6 or 8 days and the nurse for about 4 months. And that was all there was for the next 6 months. For all but the last couple of days of the last 6 months of my imprisonment, I was not only alone, but nobody talked to me. I was not called out. During that time, by the way, she wrote poems and also went a bit crazy. Now I'm going to read you from the end of the book, near the end, called A Frantic Trip to the Train Station. She had been given a new passport. They had lost her old passport. She wondered why she needed a new passport if she was going to be shot. But then she was told she was going to be expelled from Russia. And she saw in this passport a visa through Poland. So this is called Frantic Trip to the Train Station. That was the very last hour. I knew I had a passport taking me through Poland, and I knew that I couldn't wait very much longer because my Polish visa was expiring. So after 16 months of being a very good prisoner, never in any way making any fuss, I started banging on the door of the cell and shouting, my God, I'm going to miss my train. And they got the big Corpus Noi, and I said, I must go away. Eventually, he brought me 2 suitcases. I did not know that my mother had sent any suitcases, but she thought I was going to Siberia and she wanted me to have warm clothes. So there were these 2 heavy suitcases. Then they took me to the place where you wait when you first come in. And there was a desk and some people and several guards. And there was also a lieutenant who was supposed to take me to the border. And he asked me what I wanted for the trip. So, toothpaste, I told him. Toothpaste? But you must have pomaduchku and pudruchku, powder and lipstick. I told him I did not need pudruchku and pomaduchku. I needed toothpaste, but it did no good. So he asked me what shade of pudruchku I used. So I told him Rochelle. It was a kind of brownish pink. So I sat in this place where there was a big clock, and I just watched the clock, knowing that the train was leaving very soon. I was extremely nervous because if there was one thing I did not want to do, it was to stay in that prison. But I sat and I waited while he went off to find Rochelle Pudruchku. Suddenly he appeared. He put his hands up and exclaimed, I couldn't get Rochelle, but I got this other color. By that time, the train was really about to leave. There were 4 other guards, and they all took me and the 2 suitcases, and we ran out to a large black limousine. Either you travel in a large black limousine, like in the movies, or in a prison van, which is what she traveled in when she was arrested. So we got into the limousine. 2 guards with bayonets sat in front and 2 in back with me. When we arrived at the train station, we jumped out of the limousine, my guards running with the heavy suitcases, and came to the train just as it started slowly moving. We just barely made it, and I began to laugh because I always just barely make it to the train, you see. So the guards tossed up the suitcases, and the 4 of us jumped onto the train, and they stayed with her till the Polish border. Then they jumped off and she went alone. So that's it. And if we have time, I would love to answer any questions. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Jean. So many good stories. Thank you so much. And so many stories only you can tell, of course. And
well, they're Eva's stories, of course.
Exactly. Yeah. So Susan is asking, I'm a long-time admirer of Eva's work, having purchased flatwares, plates, bowls, and assorted other pieces. Like Eva, I believe beauty makes people happy. In fact, that is why I became an architect. I'm grateful to Adam for his work to make Eva's work accessible. So I think at this point, we should say that Eva's great-grandson, Adam.
No, Eva's grandson.
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 Okay, I'm sorry. Eva's grandson, Adam, is producing Eva's work again, and so it can be purchased online from his work. And we will, of course, put a link to that website in our follow-up email. So Susan is asking, I've long been interested in Eva's Jewish roots and the effect it had on her. What was her position towards Judaism? Did she speak about Judaism? Did she experience anti-Semitism? Like what?
Well, I can answer that. She had absolutely no identification with feeling Jewish. She felt Hungarian. And when she came to America and had children, she enrolled us in the Unitarian Church. Mm-hmm. So at that time, she said, in Hungary, you thought of Jewish as a religion. Now, there may have been anti-Semitism, but you thought of it as a religion like Protestant or Catholic that you could go in of and into or out of. And she and her mother, parents, did not identify with being Jewish, particularly Jewish from the shtetl or so. They didn't deny it, but they knew they had, of course, Jewish roots and old great-grandpa Vol, but they did not feel that they identified as being Jewish, particularly Eva not. And by the time it got to me, completely not. I'm very proud of him, but I don't identify at all with being Jewish. And they didn't celebrate any Jewish holidays or anything like that.
Thank you. Now we're jumping a little bit because Susan asks, I love the photo of Eva with a glorious collar that looks Sonia Delaunay-ish. What was her contact or knowledge of other designers? Was their relationship to Bauhaus?
Well, the relationship to Bauhaus, Eva, is really very interesting because the Bauhaus, and when Eva was at Schramberg, they were doing similar geometric things. But she said something extremely interesting. It's assumed by art historians, well, obviously she was influenced by the Bauhaus, but she felt that she was not. She said that the geometry began with the Cubists And the Cubists influenced both the Bauhaus and her, and it was generally geometry in the air. So even though it may be written that she was influenced by the Bauhaus, she thought they took themselves a little seriously, and she was more playful. Her I didn't mention this in the talk, but her motto was the playful search for beauty.
Mm-hmm.
So that's her relationship to the Bauhaus.
Yeah. So somebody can't help but ask whether Mrs. Molotov's husband was the bomb maker.
Indeed, it was.
Oh my gosh. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. So, where were your other family members? Were they all able to come to the US, or did any of them die in the Holocaust?
Well, yes. Her mother's sister died in the Holocaust. In her mother and her father did come over, and her brother, but her mother's sister died under terrible circumstances. They had the sister and her husband lived in Vienna, and they had a retarded son in his 20s, and they could have left, but the Gestapo said to them, unless you can get your son out of here, you will not get your passport back. And they didn't want to leave him there. And they both, and the son died in the concentration camp. Mm-hmm. But the others, I think all the others, direct family members came out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And her grandmother died in Budapest before the Holocaust. So,
mm-hmm. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. Thank you for all you have told us, Edson is writing. 2 questions. Your first one, your mother's sense of humor was so strong. Was that a family trait? And the second one, what do you think were your mother's most important influences on you and your brother?
Well, the humor was hers. I think she had very different influences on me and my brother. And you have to ask my brother about his experiences with her. On my influence, well, our home life was not very organized, I have to say. And I just found some old notes from my school, my grade school, saying Jeannie is very disorganized. She needs to be more organized. Eva, by the way, hated housework. She loved cooking. She was a wonderful, spontaneous cook, but she just felt housework was a waste of time. And we always had somebody living with us or somebody doing the housework. What did I get from Eva? A love of people, an interest in people, being a good cook and a spontaneous kind of cook, and generally a lot of fun, a lot of travel, and curiosity about places and people. And I have to say, it was a lot of fun growing up with her.
Yeah. How many languages did Eva speak?
Many languages to the end of her life. English, Hungarian, Russian, which she had learned from a dictionary. And the Russian lady who took care of her said it was just perfect Russian, and German, of course, and English, and French. She had a real talent for languages.
Amazing. Very, very inspiring. Jean, the last question, because we are running a little bit out of time. two people comment, and I did that before we started this webinar, comment your necklace.
Oh,
How it looks like, whether it was your mother's design. So I let you tell the story.
no, it wasn't my mother's design. And I love this necklace. Unfortunately, it's probably made out of ivory, but it is lima beans. And I don't remember where I got it. By the way, the answer to many questions are on Eva's website, like where you get her things and books, etc. And that's evazeisel.com.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jean, for telling.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.